Hello everyone. We are still waiting for Vidya Dinker as our moderator. Unfortunately, she has a problem logging to the link. So yeah, perhaps like we could wait for 1 more minute until she can join us. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Hello, Dereje. How are you doing?
How are you? Fine.
I'm
It's
good.
cold.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the winter, yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, Bruno. Hi, Claudio.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
It's the winter in Brussels as well.
Yeah. Hope you can survive.
Hello Sudhir, are you there?
Yes, yes, Arnie.
Yeah, can you reach out to Vidya?
Yeah, I sent her the link again. She said she registered, but it's not working. So Bambang said he's chatting with her now. Let's wait a few minutes.
Okay, thank you, Sudhir. Apologize, everyone.
I see Christian as well here. Hello, Christian.
Hi, good to see you. How are
Yeah,
you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Great to see you again.
Yeah. You in The Hague or in the Antwerp?
Copenhagen.
Copenhagen. Okay.
Yeah.
Maftuk, I'm in your city.
Ah, Mustafa. Yeah. Tomorrow we can. Okay.
Yeah, let's see.
Okay. Tofe already here or?
Yeah, I think Toph is here already.
Oh,
I saw her name a few minutes ago.
hello, Tofe.
I am here. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you. Thank you. We already have 39 participants.
Vidya says she had joined.
Vidya has joined.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we can now start. Hello, everyone. Hi.
Hi, Vidya. Probably you need to rotate your phone. Vidya, can you hear us?
Some problem. I don't know what happened. Anyway, I will try. Okay. Are you able to hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you. You're on mute
Ah,
now.
thank goodness. Till now I could not hear you. Started sweating, not being able to come in. Now, are you able to make me a co-host? Bang bang.
Yeah, you are already a co-host now, Vidya.
Okay, great. Okay.
Can you guys hear me when I talk?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Yes, we can hear you, Bruno. Thank you. So, Vidya, shall we start now?
Sure. So Maktuk is supposed to start, I think, right? And then hand over. That's what we decided. Is he
Okay.
here?
Okay. Let me start.
Over to you.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues and friends. Let me start the discussion. Let me introduce myself briefly. I'm Aha Maftuhan. I'm an executive director of the Prakarsa, coordinator of Indonesia Tax Justice Forum. Currently, I'm also the International Advisory Committee of Civil 20 Brazil G20 Presidency 2024. Of course, it is my great honor to extend warm welcome to you all, friends and colleagues who attended on the seminar online on taxing the super rich, fair taxation agenda at the G20 and beyond. I'm delighted to the speakers have attended. I'd like to express our gratitude to Tove Maria Ridings from URIDAT, European Network on Debt and Development, as well as Dereje Alemayehu, Executive Direct Coordinator of Global Alliance for Tax Justice, Claudio Fernandes from Gestos, Brazil. He also coordinator of working group on fair, inclusive, and anti-racist economy of C20 Brazil 2024. Thanks also to Arjun Karki from Tax and Fiscal Justice Asia, Jason Rosario from Afrodat, Bruno Ferenc from Millionaires for Humanity based in Belgium, as well as our moderator, Vidya Dinker from INSAF India, and our colleague Sudhir Sristra from SAPE, based in Nepal, and Herni Ramdaningrum from Prakarsa, based in Jakarta. Friends and colleagues, first of all, let me explain a bit why do we need to have a discussion on taxing the super rich, fair taxation agenda at the G20 and beyond. First, of course, we need to what we so-called evaluate our advocacy work on creating a fairer global tax system through the implementation of wealth tax. So we can collect lessons, we can identify challenges as well as achievement for more effective advocacy work in the coming future. Secondly, we need to continue to campaign and advocate wealth tax on various multilateral platforms. So this issue can receive great attention, big attention from policymakers as well as get support from public. So let me starting the evaluation. Since 2022, Prakarsa, SAPE, TAFJA, Indonesian Fair Tax Forum, through Civil 20 have advocated wealth tax through the G20 Indonesia Presidency 2022, India G20 Presidency 2023, and then G20 Brazil 2024. From the advocacy works that we did through the G20, to be frank, the most successful was during a G20 Brazil presidency in 2024, because as a presidency, the Brazilian government has proposed to impose a 2% tax on the super rich. They estimated around 3,000 super rich with asset more than $1 billion, which could generate revenue around 200 until 250 billion per year. However, due to objection, especially from several developed countries, the proposal was rejected, and the G20 finance ministers only decided to engage cooperatively to ensure that individuals with very high wealth will be taxed effectively. So it is not so good for us, and I request Claudio in this discussion can provide more detailed explanation what happened during the negotiation process in G20 Brazil this year. The second one, through the United Nations platform, I personally intervened directly when I was invited as one of speakers at the ECOSOC special meeting in March 2024 at the UN headquarters in New York to discuss the role of wealth tax as a tool to promote equality, financing the sustainable development goal, increasing public revenue, and increasing equity and distributive justice. Colleagues from Global Alliance for Tax Justice, DRG, TOFE, and others also intervenes directly to the UN process. Maybe DRG and TOFE in this discussion also can explain the update in more detail later on. So to continue advocacy, we need to optimize all multilateral platforms. And one of promising platform in the next year, actually, the South Africa G20 presidency 2025. I think as a continent that take lead on the process of UN tax convention and wealth tax, South Africa G20 presidency can continue the achievement during Brazil presidency. So Jason Rosario from Afrodat, I think can take a lead to continue our advocacy during your presidency in 2025. Friends and colleagues, since we still have so many challenges, I think we need to strengthen our collaboration, not only among civil society organizations, but also with millionaires. I think millionaires for humanity can be comrades in arms of our struggle. So the collaboration among us sure needed. So let us keep collaboration to continue our effort, our work to create a fair tax system globally. So last but not the least, on behalf of Prakarsa and SAPE and co-organizer, I would like to thanks to you all. Thanks to the Secretariat of Prakarsa and SAPE. Thanks to colleagues in the Indonesian Tax Justice Forum, TAFJA, LDC Watch, Oxfam, who work to prepare this event. Finally, I would like to wish all of us a good and productive discussion. I thank you. Over to Vidya Dinger as moderator.
Thank you, Mark Sichan, and what a wonderful introduction. I'm really looking forward to listening to everyone who's in the Zoom room today, and we have a stellar panel to take us through. We know that taxation is something that usually sort of makes people nervous. We don't really understand numbers. And yet we know how important this is, that we need to understand to see that we live in a better world together. We know income and wealth inequality is at its starkest right now, and many people are angry about it. Unfortunately, there's been a push in the right direction to sort of see that the gap is somehow bridged. It's not easy. It's been a long, long road, but we seem to be getting there. But because I said it can be complex, and there are so many of us who should be interested, we've made two basic things. One, we have sign language interpretation, and two, we have interpretation into Bahasa Indonesia. So those of you who want this seminar to be in Bahasa Indonesian, I hope you have been able to find the interpretation channel. If not, then Bang Bang here, who's our tech support on this, will definitely help you. So just shout out through the chat over there, and we'll try and see that things are set right. I was talking of inequality. Sometimes we also have internet inequality. So I actually had a problem to break into this Zoom room, and I'm somehow, topsy-turvy. But that's how our world is. And so I hope you will just sort of bear with me. To understand the perspective from Asia is very important to us, and those of us who put together this webinar or this understanding and sharing, room. So our hosts, especially our Prakarsa and Safi, and I call upon Herni from the Prakarsa and Sudhir Shrestha from SAPE, who really do the everyday looking after the taxation work in both these important collectives, to take us through what the current situation is when it comes to especially inequality in Asia. And that's sort of the ground and the foundation through which we are looking at taxing the super rich, and how wealth tax could possibly be a very viable option to tackle inequality and the issues that stare us in the face. Because let's face it, I mean, you can tax the super rich, and then you can have wars and other kinds of things that will take away your money or your tax money. So how is this going to roll out? We'll try to understand through the whole thing. As I said, we have a lineup of stellar panelists. But before that, to lay the ground, Hani and Sudhir.
Thank you, Vidya. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We are here to discuss a critical issue on wealth tax inequality and the role of wealth tax in addressing disparity. My colleague Sudhir from SAPE and I from Prakarsa will share to all of you about our effort on our research and our advocacy works on the wealth tax since 2018, around 2018. So we would like to start by having an intro that before this, that we know that in South Asia and Southeast Asia, like many regions across the world, face significant wealth gaps that contribute to broader social and economic inequality. And the recent data we have analyzed shows that wealth inequality is far greater than income inequality in both regions, South Asia and Southeast Asia. And since 2018, Prakarsa and SAPE have been actively conducting research and advocacy to promote a more equitable taxation policy. We were lucky that in 2019, we were contacted by Millionaire for Humanity to conduct a media release on a survey result of the political constituent in supporting wealth tax in Indonesia. And at the time, surprisingly, that about 70% of the political party constituent support this wealth tax mechanism, even though at that time, wealth tax is not something that familiar to everyone in Indonesia. But during the survey, we also explain what the wealth tax is. We explain the definition and what the impact of the wealth tax. So the next slide. So in this research, we also try to dig background or the economic and social context that happen in South Asia and in Southeast Asia. In this graph, it shows that there is a big gap between the wealth of the top 10% and the bottom of 10% in the region, and the gap is greater than the difference between the income of top 10% and the bottom 10% in each country across South Asia. So, for instance, in the report by the World Inequality Lab, they also states that in 2022 and 2023, in India, the top 1% claim 22.6% of national income, which is the highest since 1922, and held about 40.1% of the country's wealth. And what happened in Indonesia? In the next slide, it shows that the economic issue in Southeast Asia, including rising income inequality, low tax revenue, and growing budget deficit. And the Gini index in this region in Southeast Asia also shows high inequality in Myanmar, in Thailand, and in Indonesia. And the tax to GDP ratio is really low in Indonesia, only 9.8%, and in the Philippines, 12.89%, while in Brunei, it's a bit higher compared to other Southeast Asia countries, 34.3%, and Vietnam, 18%. And also in this region, budget deficits are widening, particularly in Thailand, which increased from 4.71% in 2020 to 7.80% in 2022. And additionally, the bottom 50% of the population in the region capture less than 15% of income, while the top 10% earn about 55% of national incomes. And these trends underscore the needs of policies such as wealth tax to address inequality and to improve fiscal stability faced by the government or the country in respected country. And in the next slide, we also estimate, especially our colleagues from SAPE, they estimate about the potential revenue from the wealth tax. In this slide and in the next slide is actually explain about how India, if they have a progressive net wealth tax, could raise about 84 to 3 billion, and this will be enough more than triple healthcare spending. And here, a progressive net wealth tax refer to taxing the wealth from USD 5 million to USD 50 million at 3%. So basically, when we are trying to estimate the potential revenue of the wealth tax, we even though we have different rate in calculating the potential revenue from the wealth tax, but both region shows that the tax revenue could potentially provide significant budget for the government. And in Bangladesh, a similar progressive net wealth tax could raise by 1.82 billion if we increase by 3%, yeah. And if we increase like 5%, it will be enough to raise, it will be successfully potentially raise 4.88 billion, and this will be enough more than double healthcare spending. And then for Pakistan itself, the progressive net wealth tax could raise 1.34 billion, and this will be enough to increase healthcare spending by 50%. And the colleagues from the SAPE also try to calculate what if we tax 10%, even though perhaps this rate is much higher than what Zuhman's team has proposed during the G20 Brazil. But if the government of Pakistan apply the wealth tax, the rate for the wealth by 10%, this could raise 3.5 billion, and this will be enough to more than double healthcare spending. Well, actually, for the context of Southeast Asia, we also highlight the research spending conducted by Prakarsa and the colleagues from Indonesia Tax Justice Forum and colleagues from Tax and Fiscal Justice Asia. And we found that there are tax asymmetry situation in Southeast Asia, and specifically comparing the tax rates for the working class or those people who have active income and those with the high net worth individual who earn a passive income. And then we compare the situation, the asymmetrical situation in the three countries, Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam. And we found that in Indonesia, both the working class and high net worth individual are taxed on active income at similar rate, ranging from 0% to 35%. However, passive income for the wealthiest individuals in Indonesia is taxed at a lower rate of 0.1 to 30%. And key exemption in Indonesia include inheritance, reinvested dividends, and certain financial instruments, as well as land and building transfer under specific condition. And in the Philippines, the situation also similar, where tax rate for active income ranging from 0 to 35%. And for the passive income of the wealth tax is taxed at a lower rate of 6% and 15%, with exemption for asset appreciation, various financial instrument, and specific investment income types. And the situation also not too much different in Vietnam, where the working class pays at tax rate of 0% to 35%. And while the wealthiest individual are taxed on passive income at a rate of 0.1 to 20%. And the exemption also applied in Vietnam, where wealth can get exemption for their inheritance, give among direct family members, interest income for government bonds, and saving deposit. So my last slide would be, we try to estimate what happened if in Southeast Asia apply the wealth tax. Let's say we apply like 1 to 2% progressive tax on super rich individuals with threshold of 1 million US dollar. Yeah, with this rate, Indonesia could have additional budget of approximately 19% of the education budget and 20% for healthcare budget. And in the Philippines, they could cover 16% of education budget and 15% of healthcare budget. And also Vietnam, they could have significant additional budget by 22% of education budget and 15% of healthcare budget. These estimates are based on 1 until 2%. However, if a progressive tax rate of 3 to 10%, let's say, were implemented, the potential revenue would be much higher and potentially covering a substantial portion of education and healthcare spending. And to conclude this short elaboration on our previous research conducted by SAPE and Prakarsa, for us, wealth tax is more than just a revenue generating policy. It's a crucial tool for tackling deep-rooted inequality in our societies in Asia. And by focusing on taxing the wealthiest 10%, we can start addressing the long-standing wealth imbalance. That's why Prakarsa and SAPE have been working together to advocate for wealth tax, not just at the national level, but also global level. And my colleagues from SAPE, Sudhir will share our experience with our advocacy work at both level. Over to you, Sudhir.
Thank you, Harney, for raising the important issue of the potential of wealth taxation in the region of Asia. Uh, Hi everyone, greetings. My name is Sudesh Shrestha and I am from South Asia Alliance for Poverty Eradication. So today I'm going to talk about the campaigns and the coalitions that we along with LDC Watch, SAPE, Prakarsa, TAFZA, and other organizations have been doing to advocate for the net wealth taxation in the region and also globally. So we have been part of the various forums, including the World Social Forum, the Fight Inequality Alliance, and other regional and global processes where we have been raising the issues of wealth taxation, and that it should first also start from the G20 countries themselves. So next slide, please. Yeah. So we started from our campaign for influencing the G20 C20 process from the G20 Indonesia, where we conducted a side event in starting in Indonesia, and there Prakarsa was also invited by the relevant ministries and also the OECD to discuss the potential of wealth taxation and to present what are the findings from the research and what is the potential. However, the response was that it was not practical enough to be implemented from the response from these OECD and ministries were. So we continue. So every time the situation was that it was included in the C20 policy pack, the official civil society process of the G20. However, it was not included in the G20 declaration, G20 leaders declaration as such. So we continued the same momentum when the G20 process happened in South Asia, in New Delhi, India, when the C20 summit took place. We organized a side event called Making Finance Work for People, and we also released a statement calling on the G20 nations to pay heed to the people's call for wealth taxation. And similar to the Indonesia process, this at that time in 2023 also, it was included in the C20 policy pack, but there was no mention of progressive taxation and the need for wealth taxation as such in the policy pack. Hence what it shows is that there's a continuous pressure created from the civil society, but the governments are not paying attention to that call. Next, please. Yeah. So, so unlike the earlier G20 process, this time we can see that the G20 Rio de Janeiro's leaders declaration has accepted or has recognized inequality, economic inequality, as one of the main problems, and has mentioned that taxing the ultra high net worth individuals as one of the ways through which inequality can be tackled, as well as resources can be generated for financing public services, as well as tackling the crisis that this system are mostly prone to. So we, as a civil society in coalitions, have been submitting our recommendations, comments to the official working groups, such as the Just, Inclusive and Anti-Racist working group, and several other working groups in several C20 processes. So this time we see some positive development. However, there is an emphasis on the G20 and OECD led inclusive framework on base erosion and profit shifting framework for the international negotiations on taxation to take place. So we are very cautious of it, and we demand that all the international taxation related negotiations should take place through the UN process or through the UN tax convention, that in the area which we are quite positively progressing. So we are cautiously welcome the G20 G20 Rio de Janeiro leaders declaration, but at the same time we are pushing that in the protocol development phase, in the future negotiations, the UN tax convention should take forward the wealth taxation agenda as well. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we are applying further, we are applying our further pressure, that we are now also under the initiation of Asian People's Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development. We are applying further pressure by conducting the petition campaign in support of wealth taxation to finance public service as well as climate action, that we are planning to collect 1 million signatures in Asia so that we can apply pressure from the people that indeed wealth taxation is what we really demand for, to generate resources for domestic revenue mobilization. Yes, so next slide, please. So with this, we are calling on the G20 countries to implement what they have committed in the leaders' declaration this time, and then also take forward the negotiation process, incorporating the voices of the global South as well as the civil society in this aspect. So I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity for all of you to have come to this important event, where we can further discuss on this, taking this context into consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sudhir and Harni. That was excellent. And so just to let you all know that SAPE, APMDD, the Prakasa, they're all core to the tax and fiscal justice movement in Asia. And they've laid the foundation very well why a wealth tax is really a dire need of the region. And also, how the inequality, which is so stark. For example, in India, we are always talking about the corporates called Adani and Ambani, who sort of typify the 1% that are eating up all the money, all the cream from the top. And therefore, there is a push from the bottom up for the demands that Sudhir laid out in the context of G20 negotiations and across the world, what we are asking as people of our governments. And therefore, I think we can move on to the meat of today's discussion. the panel discussion. After the panelists actually speak, we'll have an open Q&A session, so all of you can participate, put your questions in the chat, or even, we'll give you the chance to say your questions in case there are not too many questions. But if you keep, a lot of questions flying at us, which I hope you do, then we'll sort of just see that we put them to the panelists and we get responses so that our understanding becomes more rounded on this very important matter. Our panelists, and thereafter, we won't leave it at that. We won't leave it to an understanding growing within all of us. We'll also try to take things forward. And we'll try to fashion out a plan through reflections and a way forward that will be led by Christian Hallam of the Oxfam global tax team. So Christian will sort of bring it up in the end, tie up the threads, and see where we want to go with this and how. Over to the panelists then. We have 4 here. We were supposed to have 2, but 2 of them have other engagements suddenly and could not make it. So Arjun Karki, who's co-coordinator of TACJA and also leads SAPE, cannot be here. And Jason Rosario Braganza, who's executive director of AfroDAV, is also unable to join us at the last minute. But we have 4 fantastic speakers who can really lay the ground for our renewed campaign. And we are led by Dereje Alemayehu, who is executive coordinator of GADJ. We shall have Claudio Fernandez from Guest House in Brazil. We have Tove Maria Riding, policy and advocacy manager from Eurodad, and Bruno Florence, who's from Millionaires for Humanity, an ally that Mafta Chan was actually looking for, and we have him here. Without further ado, I'll introduce each panelist just before they speak, and each panelist will have a maximum of 10 minutes. So 8 to 10 minutes, Dereje. And Dereje will tell us about the global perspective on the role of wealth taxation in addressing, yes, you guessed it right, global inequality. That is the cornerstone of why we are demanding taxation of the super rich or the high net worth individuals. He'll also give us insights into the impacts of wealth tax policies on social and economic equity. So we should have a full round understanding by the time Dereje is done with us. Dereje, prior to his current work at GADJ, which is the Global Alliance for Tax Justice, he was the founding chair of the Tax Justice Network Africa between 2008 and 2016. And also of GADJ from 2014 to 18. He still, of course, steers the whole alliance. While on these voluntary responsibilities or functions that he essayed, he worked as senior economic justice advisor at Christian Aid. And before that, he was Christian Aid's country manager for East Africa for a full 15 years. And before joining the CSO sector, he worked as a lecturer at Free University Berlin, from where he also has a PhD in economics. So educate us, Dereje, and welcome to this webinar.
Thank you for the introduction. So it is not to educate, but to share some discussion points, really. We, as Global Alliance for Tax Justice, a coalition of continental tax justice networks in Africa, Asia, Latin America, Europe, and North America, we work on the basis of consultation, and we try to bring together our positions in a clear form so that it is a global South-led global coalition. So we are in the process of formulating our positions on this very important issue. There are no decisions taken. So what I'm trying to do will be sharing with you the discussion points which is taking place in our constituency. I'm just back from Peru, Latin America, where there was a conference of Latin Dad, the host organization of our branch in Latin America, Reducencia Fiscal. And it was also a discussion process, more to look at the problems we are facing than advancing concrete solutions at this stage. And there are very many issues that are involved. It should not be taken as simply as an arithmetical exercise of just doing percentage points. The first point I want to make is it is the increase in wealth and income inequality is not a new tendency. It is a reversal of a tendency which was there during a certain period in the post-Second World War period. If you look at the tax GDP ratio, mostly in European countries, you will see it is more or less the same, around 33, 34%. But if you look at the composition of tax revenue, it has shifted dramatically. The share of capital and the share of labor in the constitution of the national tax revenue has shifted in favor of capital, meaning there was a reduction of taxes for the rich and there was an increase of taxes on the working classes. That is why, despite reduction of wealth tax, reduction of corporate income tax, the tax GDP ratio is maintained because the tax burden is falling proportionally higher on the working class. So it is a tendency that has been reversed, because before that, taxes, there was more or less accepted as an economic doctrine, also accepted. Progressive taxation was implemented in many cases. Capital was at least taxed equal to labor to a certain extent. So there was a reversal. What did this reversal happen? How did it happen? How it came? This is an important question to understand. It is not to understand that this has been a counter measure taken by the ruling elites to reverse a tendency which was moving towards more equality. So there is a political cause for what we are looking at today, what we are seeing today, meaning the solution also should be sought politically. The second one is we have to admit it is, as I said, the cause is political. And it is not only government, there is also something we have to be dealing with as civil society. I'm worried about increasing, for example, when I recently read, despite all the regressive taxation he is undertaking, the acceptance rate of Milei in Argentina is still 55%. The election of Donald Trump tells us also some story about it. And an interesting anecdote I want to share is there was I don't remember when it was. There was a referendum in Switzerland in which the population was asked to cap the income difference between the average income and the top income to 12-fold. Not to let the upper income be more than 12-fold of the mean income. This was defeated in the referendum. So meaning we have to challenge the narrative, which has some acceptance in the population as well. So we have a politically induced inequality, and we have a politically entrenched acceptance of it. So we have to start, this should be our premise. That is an important thing I want to emphasize, that we have a political challenge in this, including our task of changing the narrative to have a popular support for the drive to towards taxation. The second important thing is when we talk about wealth taxation, we have to look at the national and the international dimension. It's very important. When we throw out figures, it looks like as if we had a global government who will just tax the rich globally and then distribute the revenue globally. The world is divided in nation states. Taxation is a national issue. So in this sense, we have to always look at what are the national aspects of wealth tax, what are the international aspects of wealth tax. At the national level, it's about political mobilization, building alliances, changing legislation, fighting those who are determined to maintain the status quo. When it comes to the international level, we have another issue. That is, we have to look at the composition of the wealth. What do I mean by that? If we take the French billionaire, are we going to assume that their wealth was created only in France? I don't think they will accept it themselves. Bolloré, if he is rich, a rich French billionaire, his wealth was generated in West Africa. He owns, the seaports he owns, the mining fields he owns. All these things should be taken into consideration. So why do I raise this? Because if we say wealth tax is going to be taxed at the residence level, it will do the same injustice that corporate income tax has been doing in the past, meaning only the residence countries benefit from although the benefits are generated elsewhere, when it comes to tax revenue, only the residence countries are benefiting. That is why in our corporate income tax campaign, we always said that the source countries should also benefit from global share from global tax revenue. So this is a very important thing. So now, when we talk about wealth tax, we have to look at not only the residence of the wealthy, but also the source of their wealth. This should be dealt with. And then there is another one. What do we do with what some researchers call stateless income? I don't know the current figures, but I remember some 6-7 years ago, there was a serious research on that which estimated that up to 31 trillion offshore wells exists. How do we do with this? What researchers call stateless income? All are these issues. What I cannot summarize everything. What I'm trying to say is, when you talk about wealth tax, at the national level, it's a national policy issue. Each campaigner will analyze his or her own situation to have an adapted policy and campaign. But when it comes to wealth tax globally, we have to look at these factors about source of wealth. We have to take into account that there is no world government which can collect this tax on behalf of the global population. So how do national states come to work together to get a solution to sharing the taxing rights around globally generated wealth? Now, I hope I'm still on time. There are
Yes, you are.
discussions. There are some discussions we are carrying out at the current moment about the issues about what the G20 is initiating, whether we take the G20 initiative as something that is pushing the agenda forward or not. Again, I have to repeat, we are discussing these things. We have not come up with a public position, but I will share my personal position with you. I am more worried than happy when I see these things being taken up by the G20. They say once it is based on our past experience. The G20 took up the profit shifting and based erosion and profit shifting issue, and mandated the OECD to do something about it. I don't go into the details. The inclusive framework was created. What did happen at the end of over 10 years? It came up with the two-pillar solution, many of you know, which left all questions unanswered, limited the scope of the whole discussion to 100 multinational companies, and limited the distribution of global profit to 10% of global corporate uh, taxation. So after 10 long years in which so many countries were involved, in which so many propaganda was done, effectively nothing was done. Now, who is blocking this process itself? It is not, it is the US. The process is stalling, it's not advancing, and now forget it that it will ever be ratified by the US Senate under Trump. Even under Biden, it was not a possibility. So an institution which failed to do any solution to corporate income tax, I'm not expecting it also to do anything or to bring any solution to the wealth tax, global wealth tax issues. This is the first point. The second point is we campaigned so long and so hard to bring global tax issues to the UN, despite the blockade tactic that was but that was pursued by the US, led by the OECD countries, led by the US. We succeeded in bringing it to the United Nations, and now to accept a process which takes away an important global taxation issue from the UN and bring it to the OECD back. This is really a reversal of a tendency. It is not a positive way forward. And I cannot see why a country which is blocking a process at the UN will be unblocking it when it is happening elsewhere. So my biggest problem is through this, we are, whether we like it or not, it will be a fragmentation of the UN process. It will be eroding the integrity of the UN process to debate and to come to a negotiated solution. Instead of pursuing this, if we start uh, taking the issue to all forums possible, we will only divert attention, we will only undermine the integrity of the whole process. And it's just like you will not make your sauce better in taking it to different ovens. It is better to focus on one oven and prepare it instead of taking it everywhere and where it is not stirred well. So it is at this moment, the whole focus should be on the UN process. If we fail there, then we can start looking at different opportunities. But another point which you should say is, if the UN process was spearheaded by Africa, there was one important reason for it. It was because they were frustrated by the inclusive framework at the G20 OECD process. The chief negotiators of the Africa group, who are now at the UN, were participants in the inclusive process. Because they waited 10 years, they didn't get anything. That's why they fought hard to bring it to the UN. And now I don't think it is a wise thing to do, to tell them go back to the OECD. So it is a very important thing. Now my last point will be on this protocol issue. It is well and good to have operationalized protocols on different issues, but the backbone of everything is the convention itself. So we have to see to it that we have a solid convention which tells us about which has in principles and commitments which has elements of global wealth taxation, which has elements of environment, human rights, all elements are there. So if you have an integrated, comprehensive, and robust global UN tax convention, the protocols will then have a basis on which countries can negotiate to agree. But if we think we can forget the convention, and the most important thing are the protocols. We will not serve both purposes. So it is very important not to prioritize the issue of protocols, but to stand firm on the issue of a robust and integrated, comprehensive UN tax convention. If you have that, we will have a framework within which to negotiate also the different protocols within it. So the important thing is this really. There are countries which are moving this forward at the UN, and there has been a consistent alliance of the G77 in this process. If you look at every voting outcome in the process so far, there has been about 4 or 5 votes on this issue. The fronts have not changed. And the only guarantee for progress is to maintain this solidarity, because the blockers, it's a conscious block. There are those who are benefiting from the status quo who are blocking it. It is not lack of ignorance. So this is the only guarantee to move this agenda forward is the solidarity of the G77. They have shown it, and let us keep this momentum, and let us keep this momentum within the UN so that there is no distraction from it, so that the integrity is maintained, so that there is no fragmentation of issues. You cannot, as I said, you cannot cook this thing on different stoves. One issue in this kitchen, the other issue in another kitchen under another cook. That will not bring us any reliable food. So let us focus on the UN process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dereje. It was like listening to a wise man, and you put everything in perspective in the very beginning. And let us see what our other panelists think. And very important points coming from Dereje, where he's trying to caution us not just about the all-round challenge on a wealth tax. There are political challenges, he reminded us, and that there's wide acceptance of the fact that it need not happen amongst the general population, that there needs to be a national focus and an international focus, and that the wealthy themselves are rather international, multinational, and we need to focus on where the source of their wealth is, and the whole aspect of stateless income. So while we are opposing as climate activists fossil oil, etc., there are oil wells pumping in, and therefore stateless incomes being had. How do we coordinate this? And Dereje, thank you for reminding us that we must not be fragmented. The G20 may be discussing it, but it might actually be a distraction, and a very expensive distraction if it takes us away from the from the UN process. And cook our cake in one oven. It's Christmas time, and it's a time for cheer and solidarity. And can we work together to see that we do not erode the legitimacy and the integrity of the UN process that all of us are so keen on, and stand with the Africa group, stand with the G77, and maintain this momentum and solidarity. And therefore, I go straight to Claudio Fernandez from Gesto in Brazil. He will tell us about civil society's role in advocating for taxes on the super rich within the G20 discussions. And coming right after Dereje, I think listening to Claudio will be immensely interesting. He'll also be sharing best practices for building civil society coalitions for tax reform, something that Gadget is also very keen on. Claudio is the lead economist and policy advisor for, of course, this Brazil-based NGO called Gestos. And I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Claudio. He's also part of the civil society working group for the 2030 agenda, which is an active network of 64 organizations, no less, and social movements. Mr. Fernandez is the creative director of the Spotlight Report on Sustainable Development in Brazil, which is published yearly by his group Gestos ever since 2017. He has been a political economy researcher and data analyst. So he's the number cruncher. So we heard the politics and from the Rege, and now we'll hear the numbers, I'm sure. His work has encompassed tax reform, financing for sustainable development, and he's co-facilitated the C20 Working Group 1 on fair, inclusive, and anti-racist economies, and has advised the C20 president and the C20 Sherpa on economic and financial matters during the just concluded Brazilian G20 presidency. So we really look forward to hearing your thoughts. A panelist who might be ranged right there against what Dereje has told us, but we're willing to absorb it all and then sort of mull over things. Over to you, Claudio.
Thank you, Vidya. Terima kasih, brothers and sisters. Salam alaikum, Indonesia. Taxing the super rich. I'm going to approach from a fundamental perspective of what tax means. Tax is an imposition, right? It's an imposition of a condition of power upon the subjects of that power. That's how tax appeared in the world. It was the power of the sword. Either you pay me or I'll cut your neck situation. That's how tax was created, right? So it is very much an instrument of power. And after the state power became republics in many countries, you know, still in several monarchies, but we have become kind of a sons and daughters of the political organization from the Enlightenment. Okay, so we had bylaws and we have Congress, we have courts, we have all that. It came this idea that tax was the way to support all this apparatus, the apparatus of state, of government, of governmentality, in a sense, you know, like you have to employ, you have to invest, you have to have the state operative, organizing society, creating an environment that would enable the development of society in itself, and it would create the rules of the game. Let's put it this way. And the rules of the game under certain rational aspects, by design, constructed, but not necessarily unbiased, much the opposite. It has been created through the bias of those who have the power. And that's you know, a historical process that takes, you know, has taken hundreds of years, and we have the establishment of that process. If we imagine income tax is something that only appeared in the beginning of the 20th century, like in the United States, only in 1911 income tax started being discussed, even though there were other income taxes experiments, particularly in Scandinavian countries in the end of the 19th century. But it's a very new thing. Something else that we have to remember in the fundamental aspect of taxation onto people in general, and the distribution, or as the tax people talk about, the expansion in a broad base taxation system. It was one of the main reasons for the American Revolution and its independence. First, it was taxing excess taxes on export of tea, and then after the U.S. constituted a government, one of the big problems that the government had against its own people, it was when it decided to raise the whiskey tax. And then almost there was a, you know, a complete revolution within the revolution of that government. But then government knew, oh, we need resources to actually operate. Okay. Other aspect is that we have a big challenge on tax cooperation and overall in the globe, because the fundamental aspect of taxation is based on sovereignty, national sovereignty. Okay, I would like to remind everyone, particularly that's the ongoing negotiation at the UN on the Framework Convention is for tax cooperation. And tax cooperation will be a kind of a, you create a situation where more information is going to be exchanged, but will not necessarily set legal standards or barriers or let's put it this way, influence legislation up to a point where national Congress are going to have to carry over. Unless that it's really worked out within the national boundaries, then it cannot really advance in a global way with a further distribution of a concerted effort for global taxations. So we definitely need a lot of cooperation, a national cooperation for that to happen. And in this case, the experience at the G20 was quite interesting because what it became somewhat more evident, particularly with the dialogue with the Brazilian governments and the Sherpas and the Ministry of Finance, was that particularly the Brazilian government sees the G20 as kind of an agenda pusher, kind of utilizing the situation and the momentum, the historical context, to see if he can push certain parts of the agenda and advance in all of these multilateral stages. And that was the attitude, in a sense, that Gestos Bong in Brazil had in relation to the G20, was particularly to bring the issues, to unify the civil society issues. And no matter which stage, multilateral stage we are talking, we're actually coordinating in one consistent message. And that consistent message is the message that we need: redistribution of wealth, okay? Several ways of redistribution of wealth. Very, very important, the fact that the Brazilian presidency called on Gabriel Zucman and his team, the European Tax Observatory, to come up with a plan on taxing high net worth individuals. A little bit of history, it was that in the first Minister of Finance meeting, he made a presentation, and that was commissioned to prepare a blueprint for that process. Very important to bring that onto the front stage of the discussion. That spilled over to, for instance, the discussions at the second preparatory committee meeting for the fourth Financing for Development conference. Several states supported it loudly in many ways. And then that the further discussion that was approved in the text of the G20 communique, and here a little parenthesis about consensus, is that in geopolitics and in global decisions, consensus tends to water down the aspirations, the wishes, and we get usually very frustrated about that watering down. But as long as the issue is being discussed in the global stage, that can pick up momentum. And then it goes back to the responsibility of the national sovereignty in the sense of the citizenry of the nations to actually rise up and push up the pressure, pump up more pressure onto their own national governments, so their own national governments can coordinate with other nations that also have the same kind of popular aspiration and pressure. As a matter of fact, the Zucman blueprint on international taxation constantly talks about it's a decision that citizens and voters of the countries need to acknowledge and need to reinforce. Even though it talks about a global plan of taxing on 2%, the ultra high net worth individuals. And here's a parenthesis as well about the fact that the greatest majority are men, in this case. So there is a gender bias within tax systems themselves. And that is quite important in the sense of trying to equalize a little more on the process of redistribution of wealth based on several aspects. But then we have the narrative. Actually, Dereje talked about the narrative, Mahfoud as well. The point of the narrative is that power is in inverse proportion to taxation, to the will of being taxed. in the sense of, for instance, there was just an article a few days ago. I was coming back from New York, and I read this article about the NVIDIA CEO, currently like the 10th richest man in the world, actually avoiding about $8 billion in taxation. And there is a quote in the article that was quite interesting by somebody else, another billionaire, that says, only suckers pay state taxes. And this notion that when you have power and you have a lot of money, you don't want to pay taxes is very much widespread. So that's the cultural aspect of it, and this needs to be fought. And another spillover of this cultural aspect is that when you talk about taxes, the corporations usually they say, "Oh, you're going to reduce our efficiency. We're not going to employ as much." They tend to use this kind of threats to any process of taxation. And it created this hegemonic narrative that taxing is not good for the economy because the private sector was supposed to bring in the capital to actually mobilize the economy. But that's not in reality what really happens. What happens is that since the beginning, all of this, apparatus of the state and the development of the global economy comes based on public investment, and public investment depends quite a bit on taxes, even though it also depends on debt. And what has been created lately is this, kind of a mice game or a rat race of debt and taxation, like taxing for paying services of debt, which is another conundrum that needs to be fixed. And that conundrum actually creates a situation where you have low investment on what really makes nations develop, like education, like healthcare, like social protection, particularly in the developing countries, because developing countries need that social protection for their populations. And especially in a situation where we are having a lot of disruptions in the job market, and we're having less and less protection for the labor force. And the states, what are the states? In a sense, they are governed by certain parts of the population, which constitute that elite that tries to avoid tax. So then you create this conflict of interest in that situation. Besides the wealth tax and the high net worth individual tax proposed by Zuckman, that needs to be approved by national congresses and parliaments and everything, there are other ways of also redistributing wealth. Inheritance tax. Like countries need to really work on their inheritance tax. Capital gains tax. When a government needs to increase their budget, like what happened in Canada in the budget process in March, in April, the end of March, beginning of April, there was a gap in the Canadian budget, and they raised by 15 percentage points their capital gains tax, like this. And there was no flight of capital, in Canada, for instance. And that needs also to be tackled. What does that mean? It means that the government has sovereignty power to decide on certain things. And sometimes when it has political power enough to say, oh, that's what needs to be done, then it's done. It's not that complicated. But what needs is exactly that political power. And I'm about to finish if I'm stepping over my time, but I would like to call attention to another type of taxation that could leverage quite a bit of a lot of systemic issues related to our current financial system, which would be financial transactions taxes. That can regulate, high frequency trading, for instance, which is extremely speculative. And that also would bring to the surface a lot of illicit financial flows that occurs in the process of financial transactions. And that could be easily implemented by the Bank of International Settlements, for instance, since the whole system is already digitized. But that is currently the Voldemort tax, as I call it. It's the tax that no one wants to talk about. Not at the financing for development discussions and negotiations. They talk about any kind of taxes now, fuel tax, excise tax on tobacco and things like that, but no financial transaction taxes anymore, no discussion on that. And talk about high net worth individuals that can be discussed like just kicking the can down the road. I don't know how is that going to happen, but I'm just going to give an example that happened in Brazil during now the tax reform. We're going through a tax reform in Brazil that was okay, I'll finish it up with this. And that tax reform, it was supposed to be a progressive tax reform that would be pretty much like the sovereignty of the country in reforming based on the global perspective of, distributing wealth. But the internal politics is making that so difficult. And we might have a tax reform that is just going to be kind of a simplified version of a regressive tax system that we already have. So not really a tax reform that is going to tackle the main issues like the wealth tax, the financial, and other taxes that would distribute wealth, but continuing to be the broad-based type of indirect taxes that supports the state apparatus. So it's not really much of an advance. And with that national example, I finish here. And I would say that in the sense, I would like to end with this phrase that the workers of the world are the ultra-taxed people. And we need to unite the ultra-taxed population of the world to really push for more taxation of the ultra-wealth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudio. That was fascinating. One presentation after the other. I think it was fantastic that we got a historical perspective from Claudio. Also, the political, pushes and pulls, the national, complex stage where sovereignty and, whether progressive taxation is even possible, whether the political will is there, and also even if individual nation states think of progressive taxations in international fora, while they try to arrive at consensus, it often means a watering down. Serious things that we need to consider in our campaign. And I think there will also, this lifting, not just wealth tax, we should also focus on inheritance tax. We were reminded on capital gains tax, which was also discussed during the recent US election, I think. And then, of course, the speculative financial transaction tax, which everyone is indulging in all kinds of financial transactions that really take wealth away from the people in so many ways. So illicit financial flows, how do we stem that? Many, many challenges put to us by both our first two panelists. And now we'll go on to our next, and let's see what else is in store for us. Samira, I think Tove had to leave temporarily, so shall we go to Brunei first? No, to Bruno. I said Tove and you became Brunei. So,
Yeah,
okay.
No problem.
Thanks, Samira. Thanks. Thanks, Bruno. So Bruno Florence is from Millionaires for Humanity, and really is a rare kind of individual. And it's a small group that builds allies with us and pushes the system to actually deliver. Most of the capitalists and the corporates that we know of are usually seeing that our governments work against us. The classic case of the fence eating the crop. But here we have a different kind of high net worth individual group. And Bruno has grown up in Belgium and is one of the heirs of a Belgian corporate group. I don't know how happy your group is with your ideas, but hopefully you can stay the course. He has been reflecting on issues like sustainability, the fight against poverty, his own privileged position in society, and the need for a fairer global system. And all of these agitations in the mind kept leading him to the same conclusion. He says that if someone like me is really serious about changing all these things for the better, fairer taxation is the core issue to act upon. Bravo for that. He thereafter became a member of Millionaires for Humanity, and he's been very vocal in the Belgian media, advocating for taxing high net worth individuals. And most of them, of course, are high net worth because they belong to corporates. And therefore, it's a difficult struggle, both within and without. We are happy to have you here, Bruno, and looking forward to hearing from you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Yes? Okay. Fantastic.
Perfectly. Nobody can
Fantastic.
actually stop you from me talking because the rich can always speak.
That's rich. Their voice is way too loud also. And at the same time not. And I'll explain later on. I have no idea. No, actually that's not true. I do know what the group thinks. And I also do not care because it's not like they can take away my shares. So that's a good thing. Okay, how am I going to go about? I want to bounce on something Dereje said about the challenge the narrative. I want to bounce on something Claudio said about the works over the world or the ultra text, and something about those who have the power, the politicians. Maybe I'll start by just explaining a little bit. I'll start my time, by the way, by just explaining a little bit how I came about to become a member of Millionaires for Humanity, and then I'll finish with a main conclusion. So for some time, I've been thinking, and for years, I'd always been thinking there is something wrong with the narrative and with what I'm being told about wealth in Belgium or anywhere else. And so I started reading, I started looking around, and then a couple of small triggers made me really think I need to focus on and I need to deep dive into this issue. And this whole analysis, personal analysis and societal analysis, and thinking of it, what's my role as a very wealthy in this whole dynamic, in this whole thing happening, that led me to become a member of Millionaires for Humanity. And the way I approached it was also to do a kind of question and answers with every answer that is always given in the current narrative, in media, in when you have a conversation with a very wealthy. Usually the same things can come about. So as everyone here, I think there is a massive imbalance in how things are taxed. So my wealth, when I look at it, and when I went into the numbers, is taxed way less than my labor income, and everything started a bit from there. I'm not going to go to every question and answer I had. I'll pick two out, for example. One of the things that always comes back when you talk about wealth taxation is, oh, but you can't do that because that money, that income has already been taxed in the first stage when it was a labor income. Then it was taxed already, and now you're going to tax it a second time. That's unfair. Basically, there's a lot of that with the very wealthy. And this is unfair to me. Answer to that, just in Belgium, it's been it's been a thought that, or a paper made checked out, that there is in private banks 481 billion euros being managed by private banks for Belgian wealthy individuals. The question is, how much of these 481 billion can you link to the usual narrative of someone working hard, getting some wealth, and then having it managed? Most of that money is not connected to that kind of story. Most of that money is connected to my kind of story, which is being born and then generation after generation money being brought down, and also money that is not really used. So it becomes an added value, and added value, and added value, and added value, and a kind of snowball. The second thing that very often comes back is, oh, but very, wealthy people, they take risks. They take risks, and then if you take more risks, then you should get more reward. That is absolutely not true. And for both examples, it is as of certain levels of wealth, you don't take risks anymore because you become the casino. You can bet on every horse, and you can't lose. You can't lose anymore. As of certain levels of wealth, you can't lose anymore. So that narrative goes out of the window as well. And I kept going and going and trying to understand. I went to, oh, what about philanthropy? Oh, what about you shouldn't have the choice. You also could choose not to not pay taxes. All these things I went to analyze. I also went to see, why is it so important, and that everybody here explained very well. A continuous income inequality is going to be a disaster for everyone, including wealthy people. And there is enough, data that shows that at a certain level, income inequality creates, or wealth inequality, sorry, creates a massive reset, which comes with ultra violence, and we must want to avoid that. So I kept going and going, and I also thought that I see that I'm not the only one who sees that. It's been said before in the webinar. The majority of people are for wealth tax. We can see that it's leading to bad things. We know that it's increasing and it's getting to very dangerous levels. How is it possible that nothing's happening? Why and how? And basically, my latest conclusion, and also, not that many people are vocal about it, but I know other wealthy people who think like me, and then are not vocal about it. And basically, my main conclusion here is that we live in a massive state of denial. Denial from three groups of people. First of all, and Dereje said that there is the non-wealthy people, I'd say, who I think it's, and I see, and when I talk about it with friends and other people, it's very difficult to imagine when you've never seen that kind of level of wealth. It's very difficult to imagine that kind of level of wealth. And so it's so unimaginable that most people don't really care because, well, that's not, it's difficult to see it as a reality. So yeah, okay, that is not there. Then you have the wealthy people like me, and I'm convinced that most of them, well, I'm convinced. I can only base this on Belgium and on what I've seen. A lot also live in a state of denial because at a certain point it becomes so much that you think, oh, it's just a lot, and I prefer leading a normal life and raising my children the right way with the right values. And so I pretend it's, in a way, I pretend it's not really there. In my daily life, I pretend it's not there. And then who talks about it are actually the very, very, the top ones, the Elon Musks of the world, and at the national level, you always have a couple of, like Dereje mentioned Bolloré, Carlos mentioned Bolloré. You always have a couple of people that are very high profile, and most of them are businessmen and people who follow that narrative of, oh, I've everything. I raised it myself, or this is all for me. And then you have all the people underneath who don't speak or don't say anything, who know it's not true, but it's a very useful tip of the iceberg to say, oh, I have nothing to do with that. That's the kind of wealth that is really problematic. When underneath there's actually a big part of the iceberg, I think, that is living in denial, that thinks like, I'm not a problem, and also I'm not doing in a way also I'm not a bad person, let's say it like that. And then, and for me, that's the most important group. You have the legislators, and they also completely live in denial, because this whole thing, what I just said, basically people like me, they don't follow the narrative that politically is the narrative you want, because it's also it is the narrative I think we all want. You want to say to people, like, hey, work hard, invest, try out stuff, and then you're gonna reap the rewards. But that's not that's by definition not my when you come out with a story like mine, it's like, oh, this goes against the narrative, so that's not possible. And most of them, and now I can only speak for Belgium, most of them also completely do not come from that same kind of wealth. So they prefer not to look at it. They prefer to pretend this kind of wealth doesn't exist. That leads to then what I always say is that my interests are very much taken into consideration, but my wealth isn't taken into consideration. And then you have a sort of what I always feel like there's a big pile of wealth that is just growing, and no one looks at it. And if I can give one very simple example, almost there. If I can give one very simple example, 2 years ago, I decided with my family, we decided to not have a car anymore. And when you live in Brussels, you get a fee. You get a fee for an environmental fee for giving up your car. Fantastic. Minimum fee 600 euros. Maximum fee 900 euros. I asked for the fee because I got rid of that car, and I am entitled to the maximum fee because everything is connected to the income, to the labor income. And I don't have that much labor income because, well, I don't need to. And so my wealth income it's as if it didn't exist. It's as if it didn't exist. That kind of stuff is happening on a massive scale. We are in complete denial. And I think the one thing that really needs to happen, especially with politicians, is to, especially with people of the power, they need to be made aware, and they need to stop having the intellectual dishonesty to not take this wealth into account. Yeah, 11 minutes. I'm sorry.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you, Bruno, for the stand you've taken. Basically, it's like you've broken the denial bubble. Your own, and what you're trying to do is trying to do it for society also. And I found it very interesting, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners in also did, that you said that in your society in Belgium, people politely try to ignore the kind of immoral amounts of wealth some individuals have, or they try to look the other way. And while in our countries, most often we cannot even fathom, even imagine the kind of wealth that high net worth individuals in our society have. And the fact that even through the COVID lockdowns, their wealth grew disproportionately and they became like the wealthiest people in the world suddenly. And their closeness with politicians and with our governments means there's this crony capitalistic system. So whether you have one government or you have a change in government with another political party in place, nothing really changes for those of us on the ground. The same inequality, the same support to corporates, and therefore, whether it's in America, whether you choose between Kamala Harris or Trump, and that may be more well known what they are saying about tax, and there's slight differences, but not so much. It still takes ahead the capitalistic order. But it's the same in ours, and it's much more blatant. But here, some people are choosing not to look the other way. And I think that is very positive. In Asia, You know, it's not just you know, Imelda Marcos's shoes or collection of everything that hits people in the face, but the fact that wealth inequality has just kept rising. And there are groups like Oxfam who keep coming up with yearly reports on this, reminding civil society to keep doing the good work with people, telling them again and again. And parts of the media that are still independent of corporate houses, and it's a very, very shrinking space, still articulate this. But as you know, in Asia too, like in other places, the media is controlled by big corporates that are close to government. So there's very little that can happen. But this is our attempt, and therefore we open the floor to questions. If, you know, I am seeing that people have written in, but I may be missing some of the questions. So if somebody has a pressing question, and we have some of our speakers here, Tove has had to run off, she says in the chat, because she has another meeting that has come along. Yeah. So, or do we want to have Christian come in with his reflections right now and then go in to question and answers that Christian can also be a part of the panel to answer? Now I'm going to ask for a show of hands on this. So, yeah. So yeah, please put down your questions. Hernie and others are saying, yes, we can actually go ahead with Christian's reflections. And Christian, are you willing to come in now? I'm jumping to you straight because three of our, oh, there you are. Three of our panelists have actually, for very, very good reasons, each of them have had to be away. And so then I thought that let's actually listen to you and open the floor to questions, you know, that are directed at all of you. Let me just bring up who you are for the group here. So Christian co-leads Oxfam's policy work around tax justice. And that's what all our speakers until now have been actually talking of, from Direge to Claudio and to Bruno, tax justice. The team includes contributing to building the alliances. So Christian actually leads that work. And he also coordinates, policies, campaigns, and research that we hope will deliver a future of more progressive taxation and an end to tax haven. So all of us are basically dreamers, whether it's Derege, Claudio, especially Bruno, and you, Christian. You're a dreamer, and what is your dream? So while you reflect upon your own thoughts and your dreams, do reflect upon what we've heard until now. And we'll also think of how to move forward, but then I'll give you the last part after Q&A also for 5 minutes on the ways forward. But for now, some reflections, Christian.
Thanks a lot. I hope I'm coming through clearly. Great.
Perfectly.
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for that kind introduction and for the organizers for this space. It's a really, really great lineup you have put together and such a fascinating discussion. Before I tell you all about my dreams and kind of the reflections, I just want to remind ourselves why we're talking about taxing the rich. And I think it's helpful just to bring up a few numbers. So the first number is, we looked over the past decade what has been happening with billionaire fortunes. And what we found at Oxfam was that billionaires have doubled their wealth in 1 decade. Just 1 decade, they doubled their wealth. We also have looked quite recently on how much of the world's wealth does the top 1% of the richest own? And the number, we've done many of these numbers, but the number shocked me, to be quite honest. What we found was that the top 1% of the richest people now own as much wealth as the bottom 95% of world's humanity. And Claudio made an interesting point. He said, actually, the workers are the ultra-taxed. And that's also what we've seen. A couple of years ago, we did a report called Survival of the Richest, where we looked at the unfair tax systems across the world. And as part of that report, we interviewed one of the women that we work with in Uganda. Her name is Ava Christine, and she's a market trader in Uganda. She works in what people consider the informal economy, where it's often assumed that you don't pay taxes. Actually, what became evident when we started talking to Ava Christine and actually mapping out her monthly expenditures was that she pays around 40% of her income in tax. And that's through local fees to the local government, fees she needs to pay to municipality in order to trade at the local market, fees she needs to pay to use a bathroom at the market, etc., etc. So that comes to about 40% of her income. Meanwhile, we also have numbers that show that a person like Elon Musk is paying a true effective tax rate of around 3%. And I think that's really an illustration of who our current tax systems work for. They don't work for ordinary people. They work for the ultra-rich, and that is completely unacceptable. So at Oxfam, we worked for many years to tax the rich. And for quite a number of years, we maybe felt like we had a lot of headwind. It was difficult to make progress. We felt like not a lot of people were listening, not a lot of governments were listening, especially. But I would say that this has really changed, and it's happened faster than we could really imagine just a few years ago. And I think the background for today's seminar, this breakthrough at the G20, is really one of the most significant examples of this change that we're seeing. This mainstreaming of the idea that we can actually tax the rich. What was considered a fringe idea just years ago is increasingly becoming mainstream. It doesn't mean that we're about to see a global tax on the super rich, that we are anywhere near that. But the change in narrative alone is already very exciting. I mean, for years and years and years, we've had this set of ideas dominate international economics, the neoliberal paradigm, or whatever you want to call it. It's been there for as long as I've lived. I'm 40 years old, so that's been sort of the dominant idea set. And the reason why we're so excited for this G20 development and the call to tax the rich is that it feels like we're finally starting to turn a corner. That this idea set that we can all benefit if we lower taxes on the rich is finally coming to an end. And I think when the reason why we're so excited about the G20 developments is that it's more than just about revenue and how we can raise funds for climate development. That is, of course, crucial, but it's also, I think, what Claudio said, a cultural issue, an idea issue, an ideological issue, an issue of whether or not neoliberalism is the right direction, the right idea set for the world, or not. And neoliberalism has many components. It has many pillars, but it's undoubtedly true that one of the pillars of neoliberalism is that this idea that we should give tax cuts to the wealthy that will then trickle down and benefit all of us. And by attacking this pillar and hopefully seeing it crumble, we may also begin to see the collapse of the whole structure of neoliberalism. So that's, I mean, you spoke to my dreams, and that's really the dream. It's not just about raising revenue. It's not just about immediate solutions to finding climate finance or whatever. It's really about putting together a new vision for the world and tearing down the neoliberal order that has dominated our thinking for so many years. And I think that's why this issue of taxing the rich is something that we see big potential in for also for these ideological reasons. So revenue, of course, is really important when we talk about tax the rich, but it's not the only thing. Shifting power is really important. It's about taking power back to nation states. We heard about Dereje and others talking about how we have all these arguments against taxing the rich because a lot of their wealth is hidden abroad. It's difficult for nation states. The rich can threaten to leave if we tax them. So having international coordination around taxing the rich will also give power back to the nation state. It's also about forging alliances that can challenge the power and influence of the rich. And finally, of course, taking wealth out of the hands of the rich is also a way to decrease their power. But it's also about other things. There's a clear climate agenda. I mean, others spoke about gender, how that relates to wealth inequality. There's a very clear gender dimension. There's also a very clear climate dimension. We know that billionaires emit more carbon pollution just in 90 minutes than the average person does in a whole lifetime. This is Oxfam calculations. We also know that if we implemented a 60% tax on the richest 1% on their income, that would reduce emissions by as much as the UK's total emissions in 2019. So, I mean, taxing the rich is also about climate justice. Now, reflecting a bit on what the different speakers said and also summing up maybe, I wanted to end with maybe sketching out some principles for taxing the rich. And I think the first thing that really stood out to me was from Claudio, this point that taxing the rich is not just about wealth taxation or net wealth taxation. It's really about comprehensively looking at all the different forms of taxation: capital gains tax, inheritance tax, financial transaction tax, corporate income tax. All of these are important. We looked at inheritance tax, for example, at Oxfam and mapped where do billionaires live. And we found that half of the world's billionaires live in countries where there's no inheritance tax. So that means, in effect, that they can pass on 5 trillion of untaxed wealth in the coming decades. We also mapped how countries tax capital gains. We looked at 123 countries. We only found 3 countries in the world where capital gains is taxed higher than wages. In almost every other country, wages are taxed higher than capital gains. 20% of countries don't even tax capital gains. So, of course, we need to introduce net wealth taxes, but we also need to look beyond. So that's the first principle. It's not just about wealth tax. The second principle is to really have bold and ambitious action when we talk about taxing the rich. And this is where we perhaps have some disagreement with Sukman's proposal, which speaks a lot about billionaires and talks a lot about a minimum tax. And I think we need to be clear about who the rich are and the fact that they are not just billionaires. In many countries, for example, Kenya, other places, you don't have dollar billionaires, but you have definitely many very, very rich people. We need to look at taxing those also. We prefer for that reason to look at the top 1% in every country and say that these people within the top 1% in every country need to be paying tax. and they need to do so at high rates, not just at 2%. The third principle is that this is not just a national issue. And this is an issue that De Reggio also hammered on. He spoke about stateless income. He talked about how to distribute taxing rights from taxing wealth. That is not just about taxing in France if the income or wealth is derived from Africa. So this is clearly an international issue, and it requires international coordination. And that's why we're supportive of having this issue really centered in international tax cooperation and not leaving it with countries alone. And the final principle that I wanted to summarize was that how we do this internationally matters as much as what we do. So where do we discuss taxing the rich? Is it in the OECD? Is it in the UN? Is it in the G20? Who actually decides, who is around the table when we decide this, is just as important as how we do it. And here it's very obvious, De Reggio spoke to it, that the UN Tax Convention is really the place that this ought to be dealt with. It's the only forum where every country in the world will have a seat. It's the only forum where we can expect anything remotely ambitious. We know that the OECD will undermine anything around this topic if it's brought to them. And the G20, of course, cannot in itself develop a standard. So the UN Tax Convention is really where we need to take this. So that's my dream scenario, a comprehensive standard, international standard at the UN, looking not just at wealth tax, and being ambitious in terms of who is taxed and at what rates. So thank you so much. I hope that was clear, and I'm happy also to for us to have a lot of questions and debate in the final minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Christian. That was extremely clear. And I think a good sense of what should be done to take things forward by this group, many interested people who are also tax justice proponents like you. And I think, so some of the ideas that came from our panelists, and I wish Tove was here to talk about the UN Tax Convention. She's really the champion and has been for some time of that. If she does pop back in, then we'll quickly put her online to speak with you for at least 5 minutes. But yes, the focus from Oxfam of the top 1% from every country is well taken. The need for bold, ambitious action. And I think that is something that we all need to think about, because our political representatives, our representatives in parliament or at these international fora are really status quoists, aren't they? There is no bold, dramatic, kind of action that they can even dream of. And therefore, I think, Christian and other people in this room, your dreams need to fuel that change. Yes, now wealth tax is pretty much well known. We've mainstreamed the narrative. Many more, even celebrities and billionaires and millionaires have helped do that. But also the COVID pandemic, so many things have helped do that. But I think in case we are looking for some kind of radical kind of shift in the way this will be approached, that may not happen from those who are still holding the reins, the power reins on this, for example. And I think it's important, the UN Tax Convention, and I remember what somebody told us once, that if you're not at the table, you're probably the meal. And therefore, the UN Tax Convention is really the best place, because everyone has an equitous seat at the table. And therefore, let us not get distracted, perhaps. And while there are spaces that we can grow our clout and build towards the larger narrative that we want to push, we need to keep the UN Tax Convention space alive and kicking in everybody's mind and top and center. There are a couple of people who have said things in the chat. Yenti Nur Hidayat has said that mostly people are greedy. Not many rich people have awareness to pay tax legally. Instead of paying high taxes, they prefer to bribe government officials or politicians to provide tax convenience for them. So, the question to the panelists is, what do you think should be done so that rich people have the same understanding with us regarding fair taxation for the poor? And I think I think we will have both. We can have Bruno. I heard you're going to be leaving in another 5 minutes. Do you want to tackle this? It's
Okay.
right up your street, even if you
Yeah.
have actually
No,
touched upon some of it. Yeah.
gladly, gladly. It's a good question. I'd say, and I can only, again, I can only speak for the Belgian society I live in. I wouldn't say, I, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say most people are greedy. I think most people hate to lose out or hate to make decisions. We're all being instilled in school and stuff. You don't make decisions that make you lose something financially. Not necessarily that you want more, but losing something financially, you're made to be feel like a sucker. So and also I think on the paying tax legally here in this case it's all legal, but you do have the richer you are, the more you have people who are going to tell you, oh, if you do this or if you make a donation now, then you're avoiding this tax, and if you then you're avoiding this tax. And that's a question, or that's something that's often said, like, you don't have to do that. It's true, you don't have to do that, but I'm quite convinced in a way everybody would, because otherwise you feel like you're doing something wrong. You make that kind of decisions with your family in mind and with people with your kids in mind. You don't make that kind of decisions with the whole society in mind. If you buy an apartment, and you can sell it 10 years later for more money, you're not gonna not do it. Even if you're and the same principles apply if you're the more wealthy you get. What I think, and I can't answer the question, what do you think should be done so that rich people? One of the disasters of growing inequality is that, in Brazilian societies or in some societies, it's become extreme, where you either are stuck in a gated community, and I'm completely simplifying. You're either stuck in a gated community or you're stuck in a favela and no one is talking to each other. That same kind of thing happens very quickly, actually. So there is no understanding of what it's like. Most wealthy people have no idea of what it's like, and that's just the case. You don't know what it's like to be in the need, even if you worked as a student and then you try to to do stuff. It's not the same. And for me, what made a big change, and I'll finish with this story because it's a good one, I think. I'm within a group that is trying to help the homelessness issues in Brussels, and that group created a kind of a union for homeless people that they get together every week. And I was at one of these meetings, and someone at the other table said, "Oh, I'm Mourao is his name. I'm this and this and this and this, and I am part of this union." By saying I'm part of this union, he was actually saying I'm homeless or almost homeless, or I was homeless, or I'm in the lowest bracket, and I'm basically I'm in deep. I have deep problems. But by being like, he was confronting himself with that situation, and it's the first thing you have to do, because most homeless people, they just want to disappear. There's a lot of shame, and I was on the other side of the table, and it was one of the triggers that made me be vocal. I was like, but he is in the deepest shit possible, and he finds the strength to confront himself with that. And that's when I realized, like, we need to confront as a society, and I'm on the other side, and I have trouble confronting myself with the other side, with way too much, with opulence. And first of all, I need to confront myself with that, and as a society, as the whole Belgian society needs to confront itself with that factor, to see it as an element, and as the first step to getting out of it. So I don't know how to answer the question, but I do know that that's also one of the results of inequality, is dividing societies with people not having no idea how other people live. And that's even worse. And with that, I thank you all very, very much. And I'm going to bring my kids to the music classes.
Thank you, Bruno. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We need more thinking individuals who happen to be billionaires, but work from the heart and put their mind to it. So thank you so much. Thank you, Bruno. We'll let you grow, but we'll let you go. And you will grow anyway because you're a billionaire, as you said, just your wealth sitting will grow. So thank you. We'll let you go. I call upon Derege, Claudio, and Christian. Is there anybody amongst us who wants to make a point or ask a question of the three panelists? Banda, can we highlight the three panelists on the screen here? Yeah, there's Christian, Claudio, and Derege. Derege, I hope you had some coffee. Your throat was sounding as if it's really stretched. But there's Claudio. Claudio and Christian, is there anything that you saw in the chat that you want to respond to? Alternatively, I told you my screen is really upside down. I'm having trouble reading the stuff that's popping up. So if there's something that has popped up for you that you want to respond to, please do. But if not, if there's someone who wants to really sort of say something out loud or even question our esteemed panelists, that would be great. This Hernie was talking. Yes.
Claudio here.
Right.
It's just I would like to make a little comment about what was said before, and also a comment that was in the chat about the greed aspect of things. That was answered actually by the other panelists, by Bruno as well. It's not a question of greed per se, but how the system is designed. And the system is designed for the maintenance of power. There is a difference in class in societies, and as it was said, long time ago, and it has become more and more evident in these times of, extreme political polarization, is that there is a class war. For instance, you still have a society like India that you have a caste division where people are not, they are separated from birth. Okay, from certain to achieve certain aspects of their social life, like the Dalits. So there's still a process of discrimination and high bias based on skin color, in our American society. And when I say American society, I'm talking about the whole American hemisphere, not only the US. It's very interesting to watch, for instance, Canada nowadays doing an extra effort to highlight the indigenous roots in their foreign policy. It was quite interesting at the UN. Every time Canada now speaks, it speaks with a lot of indigenous consciousness, trying to bring that up. So far it's the only nation that is doing that. But there's, as Christian said before, there is a change in momentum. Okay, talking about wealth tax and taxing ultra high net worth individuals and unifying a minimum corporate tax, for instance, for transnational corporations, to try and tackle the process of misinvoicing of those corporations. It's very important. This is a very important moment, and that we have to become more and more engaged based on evidence. And I'm going to bring here two pieces of data. One is, for instance, in Brazil, as I said before, there is a tax reform going on, and 70% of the population supports the implementation of a wealth tax. Okay, a wealth tax in Brazil was first recommended in the Brazilian Constitution, 1988. Since then, Congress has never been able to come together and actually turn that into a law of the land. It says, yeah, we're going to explore in the Constitution a wealth tax, but that needs ordinary bylaws and everything that Congress needs to approve. Since 1988, it has not been possible to implement it, even with a rate of 70% of support. The second thing is, even with that kind of support, the narrative, the culture in people's mind goes very much on what was said before, is that people think that, oh, why are you punishing the most productive, in between quotes, of society, the people that make more money and more wealth? You should not punish wealth. But it's not a question of punishing. I think the narrative needs to be switched around. A tax is not necessarily punishment. Tax is an instrument for developing nations, for development itself, for sustainable development. So this needs to be also amplified, the positive aspect of it. So people don't think, oh, I'm losing money here, I'm being a sucker because I'm actually contributing to the government. And then it comes other things on ideology related to corruption and government corruption, things like that. Well, people don't think very much about the fact that there's a lot of corruption in the private sector to start with. Illicit financial flows is the largest majority of illicit financial flows is very much corporate misinvoicing, and that's bad faith in business making, and business transactions. And corporate shell companies, for instance, Indonesia, actually, there is a great study by SOMO from the Netherlands, an organization by the Netherlands, that actually follows the whole nut, the palm nuts from Indonesia, particularly in the island of Borneo, and how the shell companies operate on actually being able to export amazing amount of value with paying almost no taxes, particularly how they control and everything. So there are instruments that are designed for that, and that needs to be tackled in good faith. But then we have to remember that the corporate, high transnational corporate power does not necessarily act in good faith. The lobbying in national parliaments and Congress and all that. So that all needs to be taken in consideration. But I would have to say that we'll have to celebrate the fact that now we are talking more about the issue, and that inequality has come more to the front. And that's very important, and we just need to keep up and amplify even more and change the narrative, the orthodox narrative. You know what I mean? So the Oxfam reports, for instance, is extremely important to give people a perception of the disproportion, of the asymmetry of financial power in the world. So I'll finish here. Sorry for taking too long, but I wanted to.
No, thank you, Claudio. Thank you for reminding us that while we are intent on the narrative on wealth tax, on the US tax convention, saying BEPS, etc., let's not digress, let's keep the UN tax framework as the main thing. But there's a larger narrative that we need to keep trying to break. And trickle down economy doesn't really work. Corporates, well, their misinvoicing is actually theft from the development that we all should have equitably. And therefore, I think that larger narrative is something that we need to keep attacking. As you mentioned, the Oxfam reports every year try to, expose this narrative every year, and it makes it easier for us to articulate these things. It provides us the tools to do so. So, Christian, last words from you.
Well, thanks a lot. I think I'll end on speaking just a few minutes on something I think is really, really important. And that is how do we go from here? And I think, Claudio, you made some really good points from Brazil. A situation where you can see public polling that people really support taxing the rich. They support wealth tax, but somehow it's not happening. And that is not unique to Brazil. It's something we see all over the world. And I think it's important to remember that taxing the rich, numerous polls have actually shown that it's quite popular across political divides. Even, let's take the US as an example. Even conservative voters in the US, there's a majority that support taxing the rich. And I think this is surprising to some people because this debate about the rich and their contribution is very steeped also in all kinds of assumptions about right-wing politics, left-wing politics. I think when you really look at it, actually, there is popular support for this across political divides, but it's not happening still. And that speaks to what we need to do, which is to build political power. Because we are not going to achieve taxes on the rich alone by making the good arguments of why we need to do this or why it's a good idea. People already intuitively see it. They see it from their lived reality that this makes sense. When you have rich people getting richer and poor getting poorer, of course it makes sense. The argument is made. It doesn't need to be made. What we need really is a shift in power. And that's what I think we need to also help with, is to start building alliances. We need to get climate justice activists on board. We need to have gender justice activists on board. We need to really show how taxing the rich is not just a tax justice issue, but it's a social justice issues across different strands of work. And we need to unite movements around this thinking and help build those alliances. And I think that is something that we are really looking a lot at in Oxfam, but that I know others are also really increasingly looking at, and something that I think has great potential. So I think that's really, in terms of what needs to happen, is also a really important thing that we will focus on in the coming time, is building those alliances. So we hope that we can all join hands in that. And I just want to say a big thank you for organizing this. Thanks.
Thank you, Christian. Actually, yes, it is a social justice issue, as you reminded us. And hopefully we can now dream that, global poverty and, the climate crisis, our educational, our health crisis, our debt crisis, all of these multiple crises can actually be tackled by taxation that is progressive within nations, and then internationally we actually cooperate to go in that direction. You've been a wonderful audience. You've actually stayed for 2 hours and 15 minutes. I mean, kudos to you. And therefore, I'll quickly call up Nipata Kuaman. I don't know if I said that right, but Nipata coordinates the private sector program on fair taxation and fair value chain at Oxfam Asia Regional Platform. And Nipata, we look to you, thanking us all for being here for the long haul and for our commitment to keep pushing on wealth tax and the US and the UN tax convention.
Yes. So yes, thank you, Vidya. It's actually been long, but it has been very interesting as well. Yes, I mean, we start as if we were going to discuss a very focused issue, right, on tax, right, taxation, but actually we unpacked it together into kind of way bigger kind of context and system surrounding that, which is basically about inequality and how we can we need to look at different angles. For example, as we've discussed, the cultural aspect, the narrative aspect, the alliance, how we kind of work on different pieces together to kind of coming to the solution of reducing inequalities. Yeah, and I think it has been a very kind of heartwarming kickoff for me to hear like how we are piecing things together tonight, like how we can also from different perspective, different geolocations, how we can see how we can start to exchange and connect and maybe come together on this work. Yeah, and I do hope we could collaborate more and more on this to jointly move this issue forward. So thank you everyone tonight. Thank you all the wonderful speakers and panelists and the facilitator as well, and the audience and our team of co-organizers. So I wish everyone a good evening, a good day, and a good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Nipata. Thank you so much. All of you who've been chatting away in the chat, and thank you for being here. And yes, this alliance will continue. We've forged new connections today, and all towards making it a more just and equitable world. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vidya. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Maktub.
Thank you, Note, and everyone.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Vidya. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you,
Thank you.
Christian.
Thank you, everybody.
There's a
Thank
survey
you,
form that you
Indo,
guys can fill
Mato, and
in
everyone.
case you can. Okay. Bye. Bye,
Bye.
Maktub. Bye, Nipata. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, Vidya. Hello, Maftu.
Hey,
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum.
Thank you. Hello, Maftu.
Hello, 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 hello.
Very fantastic. Nice
Yeah,
to see you.
yeah,
Very
yeah.
long days later. Okay. Really fantastic. So, how do you do,
Yeah, all is good.
Vidya?
Yeah.
Vidya, it's a nice presentation and nice